The overhead lights bathed the cabin in a sterile glow as passengers trickled onto the aircraft, dragging tired luggage and wearier faces. Boarding announcements chimed overhead. In seat 3A, an elderly man had already settled in quietly. His hands, marked by decades of labor and loss, rested on his lap, fingers loosely interlaced. His tweed coat was faded at the edges, the sort you don't see much anymore, and his wool cap sat gently in the seat beside him. No one paid much attention. He was just another passenger to most. But if you looked closely, there was something dignified about him. Not wealthy, not flamboyant, but noble. Like he had once walked through fire and never asked anyone to notice the burn marks as the line of passengers slowed. A flight attendant approached. Her heels clicked authoritatively against the aisle floor. She glanced briefly at her handheld device, then at the man. "Excuse me, sir," she began, her voice clipped and professional. "There's been a change. I'm going to have to ask you to relocate to economy." The old man looked up slowly. His eyes were pale but piercing, like distant fog-covered lakes. "Pardon me?" She didn't blink. "You've been reassigned, sir. This seat is no longer available to you." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew his boarding pass with trembling fingers. "It says right here, 3A, business class. That's what I booked." "I understand, but we've had a last-minute booking by a full-fare passenger. You're on a discounted military fare. I'll need you to move to seat 34D. There was no apology, no kindness, just a command delivered with the thin smile of someone following orders. Around him, a few passengers turned their heads, quickly turning back again when they caught his gaze. No one offered a word. No one stood up. The old man looked at the empty aisle behind her, at the long walk toward economy. He unfastened his seatbelt slowly, the click echoing louder than it should have. Then he rose, carefully, like he'd stood too many times on battlefields, in funeral homes, in lines where dignity was asked to wait its turn. He picked up his set, worn, covered with faded tags from lands people only see in documentaries. Then he nodded politely and stepped into the aisle. A child watched from across the row, nudging his mother. "Mom, is that the guy from the war memorial last year?" His mother squinted. Her face changed. Others began to notice, too. Whispers spread. A man in a charcoal suit, 2 rows down, lowered his newspaper. An off-duty Marine sat up straighter, his eyes locked on the old man, jaw tightening, because this wasn't just anyone. This was Samuel Whitaker, World War II bomber pilot, Korean War survivor, volunteer medic in Rwanda and Sudan. He once flew food into Sarajevo under sniper fire. He'd been awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, but refused to accept it until the names of his fallen crew were etched into the same plaque. He never chased the spotlight. He never asked for recognition. And today, they were moving him like cargo back in coach. An empty seat awaited him. Meanwhile, the cabin crew prepared to escort the incoming full-fare passenger. A tall, well-dressed executive stepped into 3A, not sparing a glance at the man who had just left it. He adjusted his designer cufflinks and ordered sparkling water before takeoff. The elderly man hadn't made a scene. He didn't argue. He didn't shout. He simply followed orders the way he always had. But fate had a habit of rewriting injustice with moments that felt almost scripted by the heavens. Just as Samuel reached the curtain dividing business from economy, the cockpit door swung open. Out stepped a man in full uniform, polished shoes, navy blue jacket, silver wings on his chest. His presence drew attention like gravity. He scanned the cabin, then his eyes fixed on Samuel, and something changed in the air. The hush in the cabin was immediate. The man from the cockpit, tall, broad-shouldered, and walking with purpose into the aisle like he had done it 1,000 times before. But this time, it wasn't for routine. This was something else. Passengers looked up. Conversations halted. The flight attendants froze, uncertain. The pilot stopped in front of the elderly man. Just as Samuel Whitaker reached the edge of economy, the man in uniform took a breath, then spoke not as a crew member, but as someone who knew exactly who stood before him. "Sir," he said, his voice both formal and trembling. "Are you Colonel Samuel Whitaker?" Samuel blinked, startled. "I am." The pilot nodded, visibly moved. "I'm Captain Elias Hartman. My grandfather was Private Daniel Hartman, pilot who flew overhead during the worst of it." He always said the reason he came home was because someone out there in the sky made a choice to fly lower, drop support, and give cover when no one else would. Samuel's eyes narrowed softly, searching the young man's face. Daniel Hartman. 2nd Infantry. Yes, sir? Samuel's lips parted, caught between memory and disbelief. Your grandfather had a limp, took shrapnel to the knee, smoked a pipe even when they banned it. Captain Hartman smiled. That's him, you remember. Of course I do, Samuel said quietly. He called me Eagle Lees. I flew like I could see through clouds. The pilot stood straighter now. He made me promise if I ever met you, and was to salute, thank you for his life, and never forget that heroes don't always wear medals. Sometimes they just wear out. Then, with passengers watching in stunned silence, Captain Hartman clicked his heels together, stood at attention, and saluted the man before him. Samuel's mouth moved, but no sound came. His fingers trembled at his side. Slowly, uncertainly, he returned the salute. And just like that, decades folded into a moment that felt eternal. May I ask, his tone now colder, firmer, why Colonel Whitaker was removed from his seat? Her voice was small now there. There was a full fare passenger. It was overbooked. I was told, the captain raised a hand. That wasn't my question, she faltered. Sir, I thought you thought wrong, he cut in. Then he turned to the passenger in 3, the man in the suit, now shrinking visibly in his chair. Sir, the pilot said, not unkindly, I'll need you to move. The man didn't protest. He stood wordlessly, gathering his things. Without a word, he stepped into the aisle and began walking back. Eyes lowered, Captain Hartman nodded to the crew. If there's no other seat, I'll ride in the jump seat. But Colonel Whitaker sits here. He earned it before any of us were even born. Samuel tried to interrupt. That's not necessary, son. Really? With respect, sir, Hartman said, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. It absolutely is. Together, they walked back up the aisle, and this time, people didn't look away. A woman on the left side wiped her eyes. A young man, in row 5, stood as they passed and gave a crisp salute. The businessman who had watched from behind earlier now nodded solemnly and placed his hand over his heart. When Samuel reached his original seat, Captain Hartman didn't just gesture. He helped him lower into it, adjusted his seatbelt, tucked his bag safely beneath the chair. Then, without ceremony, he placed something on the old man's tray table. It was a coin, an old military challenge coin, one from the 101st Airborne Division. My grandfather gave me this, Hartman said, his voice quieter now. He said I was to carry it until I found someone who had done more than he ever could, someone who'd flown for others, not for medals. This belongs to you now. Samuel's fingers hovered over it, then closed around the medal. He said nothing, but his eyes said everything. The captain gave one final nod and turned to return to the cockpit. But before he disappeared behind the door, he turned once more. Standing tall at the entrance of the business cabin, he saluted again. This time, every passenger in business class rose to their feet. Some saluted, some clapped softly. Others simply stood, heads bowed in respect. A woman whispered to her daughter, "That man flew over Europe and Africa and never asked for thanks. Today, he got what he never sought in her." A ripple passed through the cabinet noise, but presence, something holy, something long overdue. Samuel Whitaker leaned back into his seat, not because he won, not because justice had been loudly demanded, but because, for once, the world had remembered who he wasn't, what he had given. The engines hummed beneath the cabin as the aircraft climbed steadily through the clouds, carving its path across the morning sky. Most passengers sat quietly now, lost in thought or blinking away tears. The earlier incident had shifted something unspoken in the aeronaut, just about one man. But about all the things we forget to value until we see them threatened, Samuel sat in 3A, his hands resting atop the small military coin Captain Hartman had left with him. The coin was old, its edges worn from being carried for years, passed like a torch across generations who'd served without asking for applause. He turned it gently between his fingers, the same fingers that once tightened bolts mid-flight and pulled throttle levers under enemy fire. Today, they trembled not from age, but from the weight of sudden remembrance. A flight attendant, a different one this time young, Candide brought him tea. She didn't speak. She just set it down, with 2 sugar packets, and bowed her head gently. Her lips moved, mouthing only 2 words. "Thank you." Samuel nodded softly, his throat tight in the rows behind him. Murmurs of the event still echoed. One passenger posted a photo of the salute online. Another quietly asked the crew for a pen and napkin, scribbled a note, and asked it to be delivered. To the man in 3A, the note read, "My grandfather never came back from Korea, but I believe if he had, he would have looked like you. Thank you for bringing home someone else's loved one when mine couldn't come home. We see you. We honor you." Samuel folded the napkin and placed it in his jacket pocket alongside the coin. When the plane began its slow descent, the pilot's voice came over the speaker. Not pre-recorded, not automated. "This is Captain Hartman speaking. We're preparing for landing. I'd like to thank all passengers for your patience, and also to thank Colonel Samuel Whitaker, seated in 3A, for his decades of service and sacrifice. Today, we had the honor of flying with a man who's flown not just across countries, but across eras of courage." The cabin clapped. No one asked them to. No one had to. When the wheels touched the tarmac and the aircraft coasted to its gate, the seatbelt signs dimmed. Normally, passengers would rise in a rush, pulling bags, checking phones, jostling to get off first. But not today. No one stood, not until Samuel did, as he gathered his satchel and stood from seat 3A. Every person remained still out of reverence. Out of recognition, the businessman who had once taken his seat reached for Samuel's carry-on. "Please," he said softly, "let me carry it." Samuel paused, then handed it over with a quiet nod. The mother and son from earlier waited at the aisle. "Sir," the boy asked nervously, "can I take a photo with you?" Samuel hesitated. "Why? Because you're the kind of hero I want to be. Not the loud kind, the real kind." Samuel smiled, pulled the boy gently beside him, and posed as the mother took the photo with shaking hands. As they stepped into the jet bridge, a quiet surprise awaited. An airline manager stood with several crew members at attention. Behind them, 6 veterans in dress uniforms had formed a line, standing still, their hats held over their hearts. One of them, an older Navy man, gave a slow salute as Samuel approached. The crowd that had gathered began to clap. Passengers exiting the aircraft paused to watch the scene unfold. Some asked for photos. Others asked for nothing. Just to be near a moment of dignity, Captain Hartman stepped out from the jet bridge door. No longer a pilot, but a grandson keeping a promise. He approached Samuel and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Spoke to my father after takeoff. He remembers you vividly. Told me you saved more lives than he could count." Samuel chuckled. "I just flew the plane. Sometimes that's all it takes," Hartman said. "Just one man doing his job when no one else can." Media crews caught wind of the event and tried to push forward. Samuel waved them off. "I didn't do anything today," he said calmly. "I was just a man trying to sit in the seat I paid for." "No, sir," Captain Hartman replied. "You reminded us all why certain seats were built in the first place." Later, that evening, a short video clip of the moment went viral. A few seconds of a quiet old man being saluted by a young pilot. The headline read, "Forgotten war hero reclaims his seat and everyone's respect." But Samuel didn't read the articles. He wasn't on social media. He didn't want headlines. He never had. Back home, he sat in his small den, surrounded by black and white photos of fellow servicemen, many long gone. He placed the challenge coin on a shelf beside a folded flag and the napkin note beside a letter he kept from his late wife. He looked out the window, the sky now painted in soft oranges and fading blues, and for the first time in a long while, Samuel Whitaker allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in years. Not recognition, not pride, but peace. Because that day, the world had not just seen him, it had remembered him. Before you leave, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. If this story moved you, subscribe to Hidden Sparks, like the video, and share it with someone who still believes in quiet heroes. They're out there, and sometimes they're just trying to sit in the seat they earned.